So we hope to keep this meeting to the prescribed hour and a half. Next slide, please. Just a revamp of the procedures. Obviously, to reduce noise, make sure your room or your line is muted. Raise your hand to be unmuted. And lastly, since this meeting is being broadcast via WebEx, just try to state your name before you start talking, just for transcription purposes. Next slide, please. Today, the Climate Justice Working Group, we're going to be discussing the proposed benefits and investment strategy for states in their efforts to direct the minimum of 35% of the benefit of clean energy and energy efficiency spending to identify disadvantaged communities. Because this isn't going to be a deliberative meeting related to determining the disadvantaged communities criteria, we're not going to require the physical quorum to continue. I see that we don't have it, but we're not going to require it to continue. And so I'm not going to take roll call today, but in an effort so that we remain transparent, as if this was a regularly scheduled Climate Justice Working Group meeting, we're going to continue to keep this portion of the meeting open to the public. Thank you everybody for being in physical locations and being able to discuss this today. I know this has been sort of a long time coming on this conversation, but we did have a lot of things to work towards on our end. So we're happy to finally have an opportunity to discuss this with you. Next slide. So here's the agenda for today, today's discussion. We're going to start just right off with discussing the benefits and investments approach. Then we have Shannon with us today to talk about the disadvantaged communities criteria updates. We'll do a quick review of the timeline, just to make sure everybody's still comfortable with where we are and our plans. And then we will have a quick talk about next steps for 2023. Does anybody have any questions on the agenda or any of the items we're going to discuss today? Okay, great. Well, next slide, please. With that, we will just go right into it and discuss the benefits and investment strategy. Chris, you have the floor.
Thanks, Alana. Hi, everyone. It's Chris Cole from NYSERDA. So I'll kind of lead us through this conversation today. And so, as we're working to finalize the DAC criteria, we thought it would be a good time to regroup and discuss the considerations that, the state team has had with respect to how we go about implementing the investments and benefits requirement of the Climate Act. We spent some time earlier this year on this topic, but given that this is an active, an important work stream, and it's obviously tangential to the development of the DAC criteria, we wanted to just make sure that going into the new year, into the deliberations on the DAC criteria, we have this discussion today. So, as Alana said, there's been a lot that's been going on, and we're kind of looking at this, kind of approach that we want to talk about with you today as being iterative. So we really want this to be a conversation. So any questions, any comments, any thoughts that you have on, how we might be kind of thinking about the implementation of this component of the law, just, let us know. Let's have that conversation today. And so if we can go to the next slide, please. So, three main topics that we thought would be good to cover. So kind of obviously reviewing the disadvantaged community investments and benefits requirement. We want to talk a little bit about the state's clean energy portfolio. So as we've been, kind of talking about the DAC criteria, we've also talked about what does that mean in terms of investments? What does it mean in terms of ensuring that communities are getting investment? So we think having a conversation about what the clean energy portfolio looks like and how investments flow would be a good kind of thing to make sure we're discussing as we're thinking about finalizing the DAC criteria. And then we also want to spend some time talking through how we've been kind of thinking about implementing this important requirement. Before we go any further, are there other topics related to this this kind of work stream that working group members are interested in discussing? If so, raise your hand. If not, feel free to add them along the way. Eddie, your hand's up, raised. Go ahead.
It usually is. Hey, all. How's everybody doing? I don't know if you'll be including this, Chris, but a couple of questions have come up from our members regarding. I think our understanding is the 35 to 40% CLCPA commitment to DAC communities. I'm pretty certain that at some point over the last year, the Hochul administration, to our delight, I think, announced that that same amount would apply to Bond Act expenditures now that the Bond Act has been supported. So I don't know if I'm accurately reflecting what we thought the commitment was. So I don't know if that's accurate. It'd be great if you could talk a little bit about how you anticipate that happening, and maybe more and more immediately, right? Because the Bond Act is going to take some time, obviously, but there's already we're assuming, if not IRA, Inflation Reduction Act funding, then clearly bipartisan infrastructure funding is starting to flow. And what we weren't clear about is what the administration intends. Will the 35-40% also apply to infrastructure money as it comes in? Assuming that it's infrastructure that's designed for CLCPA style impact. But yes, those are the two questions that we had. Bond Act, but more immediately, how is the state applying the 35 to 40% to infrastructure money from last year's federal law?
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. And so on the Bond Act, I'll defer to Alana or the DC team, but it's our expectation that we will be looking to apply the same kind of framework and approach to benefits and investments under the Bond Act. Which is why it's also important for us to have this conversation today, right? So while the nature of some of those investments are going to look a little bit different than the clean energy and energy efficiency investments, just the philosophical approach and the concepts that we're talking about, we're expecting to apply. So I don't know if anybody from DC wants to add to that, but that's kind of the thinking.
I will say, not with regards to the Bond Act, but with regards to the IRA, we actually did have a conversation about that today in the leadership meeting, and unfortunately, that was the moment that I stepped out. So, Eddie, I will get back to you on that information.
Alana, quick. Can you go back in and come back out? No, just kidding. Yeah, I heard you mention about the IRA, but this. I was asking also specifically about the infrastructure expenditures and bill that passed in 21. Is that also do you guys have and if you guys don't now, that's fine, but I don't know whether or not you guys have a response to whether the infrastructure dollars that have already started to flow, whether this DAC criteria will be applied to that or not.
I think we do. I don't have that information for sure. Oh, Adriana, is that you?
That is me. Hello. I think Alana's right. I think we'll have to get back to you on that, Eddie. But in general, I think all of the federal bills that are coming down now, the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction, others, I think they have their own Justice 40 requirements tied to them. And I think that's something that we're looking into specifically on how that works and how that will align with our state's own effort of defining our own disadvantaged communities and meeting our own investments strategy. And so we'll have to get back to you specifically on answering that, but that's something that we're looking into. And then just back on the Bond Act, yes, you are correct that the Bond Act does require a minimum of 35% with the goal of 40% of the Bond Act funding to be invested in disadvantaged communities. The same term that the Climate Justice Working Group is just looking to define. But as Chris said, the types of spending will be slightly different because the Bond Act it covers different types of buckets. Like there's a bucket for open space and acquisition and water quality and resiliency, and so it's a little broader than the clean energy efficiency. Hope that answers at least somewhat of your question.
Absolutely. Thanks, Adriana. I appreciate it.
Great, thanks, Adriana. Thanks, Alana. Any other hands up? I see two hands
Yeah.
still raised. Is that?
I just wanted to follow up on Adriana. Hi,
That was
Adriana. It's Elizabeth. Maybe I just need some clarity. I've got bronchitis, and maybe that's keeping me from thinking clearly. But when you were talking about the infrastructure dollars and looking at what the federal government is going to do, my impression was that a lot of the initiatives that were coming out of the federal government were being influenced and shaped by what was coming out of New York, which was the opposite of that. And so I'm really a little concerned, since they're sort of behind the curve and we're ahead of it, that we're following them instead of them following us in terms of deciding or determining what the investments are going to be in terms of infrastructure. Maybe I just have a lack of clarity, but if you could explain what you meant by that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. I did not mean to say, also, hello, hi, Elizabeth. I did not, mean to say that the federal government is dictating where New York is spending their infrastructure dollars. What I was trying to say is that there are requirements that are tied to each of those funding streams that are Justice 40 requirements, which, as you rightly pointed out, is a little bit of a mirror of the work that you all fought for and then helped to get passed within the CLCPA. The federal government, under the Biden administration, has undertaken their own process to develop what disadvantaged communities means for the federal government. That process is ongoing. I believe they put out sort of version 2 of what their map looks like. It is slightly different than what our draft map looks like. And I think, I need to speak with the rest of my team and get back to you on exactly how that's going to look, how we meet the requirements that the federal government is requiring us to meet for Justice 40, and make that align with what we are trying to do here in New York State, that we were on the cutting edge of doing.
Thank you. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe just to that point, Adriana, and for the working groups, clarity, we have expressed, the need to, our federal partners that, to have an alignment, between the federal and the state approaches to avoid, unintended outcomes when it comes to like the targeting of dollars or, kind of the administrative kind of aspects of reporting and compliance. So it seems like that is, still a work in progress, but that is our intent to get alignment there. Do we have any other hands up? I see 2 other ones. Or are those legacy hands? Okay, all right. Can we go to the next slide, please? So maybe just a bit of a refresher. I think everybody is seeing the statutory language at this point, but maybe to kind of just reinforce as we're talking kind of through, this part of the agenda, this provision to kind of, direct, to the extent practical, direct, available, and relevant programmatic resources to benefit disadvantaged communities applies to all state entities, right? So, as we're kind of developing this approach to implementing this requirement, we're doing so kind of with a lens towards, building something that all state agencies and authorities are going to be responsible for complying with. And so if we go to the next slide, please. So as we're thinking about, operationalizing this, we're really, trying to kind of look at the key kind of framing here. And, as we all know, some of the language in the statute is a little bit kind of ambiguous. And so you're really kind of needing to kind of think about, 2 specific terms that are present. So the first one being relevant programmatic resources. We need to consider, what is meant by that, right? So, what can be directed to benefit disadvantaged communities? So here we're making the distinction between a place-based investment, so those that are directed at projects or individuals, within communities and whose impact we can localize, as opposed to investments that are, more statewide or systems-wide. So thinking about, investments to clean or maintain the electric grid, where, we know there's societal benefits to those investments, but it's really hard to really pinpoint kind of the impact within specific communities. So kind of the first thing to kind of point out is really kind of this distinction between place-based and state or systems-wide investments. And then the other is, thinking about the benefits of spending. So what is meant by that, right? So in this context, we're looking at the dollar value of the relevant programmatic resources that are going to be invested, into communities, as well as the trackable co-benefits of those investments. So, energy savings, bill savings, air quality improvements, health impacts, that sort of thing. And so, we also know there's qualitative impacts that are tied to, all of these investments and initiatives that are happening under the clean energy portfolio. So throughout this conversation, we'll talk a little bit about, how we see kind of, the need to capture, impacts and other outcomes that we can't easily quantify based on the available data. And I guess as we go along, please raise your hand if you want to weigh in or ask any questions. But we'll go to the next slide, please. So, earlier this year, and this might have predated a couple of the working members, at least Jill, I know you were coming on board right after we had some of these conversations, but we wanted to do a quick kind of recap on, the clean energy portfolio. So again, as Adriana mentioned earlier, there's kind of like a whole set of considerations that we're going to have with respect to the applicability of this approach to the Climate Bond Act. But today we're focusing on the clean energy and energy efficiency investments that the state is making. And so when we're thinking about the clean energy portfolio of the state, there's a number of different kind of components. So the first is there's multiple entities, so whether authorities or agencies that are making clean energy or energy efficiency investments across multiple programs, across multiple sectors, right? So everything from clean transportation to housing retrofits to distributed energy resources like solar or storage, and large-scale renewables, investments, offshore wind, the tier 4, tier 1 kind of investments that NYSERDA has been making. And there are a number of different ways that those investments are kind of administered. So everything from open enrollment application types of programs where a resident can submit an application and be approved, to competitive solicitations where either a resident or a small business or a developer needs to submit an application or proposal and be selected for funding. So so all of the different considerations for how these funds and investments are administered will affect kind of how we can target and direct investments to disadvantaged communities. The other thing to kind of recap is, as we're thinking about the ways that these investments can benefit disadvantaged communities, there's a host of different outcomes, right, that we see as positive for underserved or overburdened communities. So everything from air quality improvements, the associated health improvements that are tied to reducing fossil fuel emissions, at the local level, economic development, so whether that's through jobs or small business development, and even capacity building right at the local level to kind of help improve engagement and really kind of put the voices of communities and the needs of communities into program and initiative planning. As we're thinking about the way that we're able to direct benefits to disadvantaged communities, obviously we're kind of distinguishing the place-based versus system-wide investments. So certain investments, as we mentioned, like renewable energy generation, distribution, and statewide efforts like marketing or even like program implementation. So depending on like the administrator, they might have a contract that is like statewide to support technical assistance, for the program. Like those types of things are going to be really difficult to kind of like localize the impact of. So that's really important to kind of think about like as we're directing kind of the dollars and the associated impacts. So, place-based investments can be directly linked to disadvantaged communities, so as we're thinking about, improving outreach, to increase enrollment in programs, or, looking at kind of program design considerations that will, really be targeted at the needs of communities, for instance. But then there's, kind of opportunities, even though it's harder to localize the impact of statewide or systems-wide investments, there's still opportunities through those investments to drive benefits for disadvantaged communities. So for instance, within, NYSERDA has recently done this within kind of our large-scale renewables offshore wind, solicitations, requiring, hiring or, economic development, project investments that would kind of happen within disadvantaged communities. So as we're kind of thinking about, the way that we're able to direct these investments, we want to be thinking of, the ways to leverage both of those kind of place-based and also the state or systems-wide investments. The other thing that's important, and we'll talk a little bit more about, and Elizabeth, I see your hand is raised. Do you want to jump in?
No, I'll wait till you finish.
Okay, thanks. So the only thing I was going to say is, obviously, we're going to need to be able to track and quantify these benefits, right? These metrics. And so, we're going to need to be thinking about, what data is available from the different programs that are administered across multiple state agencies or authorities, the quality of that data, so on and so forth. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well a little bit later. So Elizabeth, if you'd like, the floor is yours.
Sure, thank you. This is great. It really has a lot of language in there that is important to us. I guess my question really has to do, I see the advancement of community self-determination and capacity building, and I think that my concerns are sort of integrated in there, but they're not really specifically named, like creating pathways for community ownership and wealth. Where does that live in this description? And if it's not clearly stated, is it possible to incorporate language about, as we're addressing renewable energy, that we should be building the capacity for community ownership and wealth?
Yeah,
And I don't mean reduce cost or things of that sort. I'm talking about putting the community on a path to literally even owning the utility.
Yeah, so definitely not intentional to leave out, ownership of energy generation and kind of the wealth building. So I think, we would kind of include that obviously in kind of that second bullet in the sub bullets, but, I think the path there, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, Elizabeth, is, when we're kind of looking at where we are today in terms of the state's clean energy investments and strategies, obviously there's a lot of work that we need to do to kind of really make sure we're addressing the needs and the priorities of communities. So, we'll get to it in a bit, but, one way that we're thinking about this, and we can make sure it's explicit, right, in kind of the materials that we put together, but would be, working through like co-designing of kind of, initiatives and priorities and policies. Like, so what are the things that we really need to make sure we're doing, and how do we set the conditions to work with, with communities to kind of get us there? As we're thinking about program design, where we are today and where we need to go, just using NYSERDA as an example, that's kind of, one way we're looking at addressing kind of that specific need that you've outlined is, being more kind of like collaborative in terms of, determining how we support the needs of communities. We'll go to the next slide, if that's okay. So, kind of speaking a little bit to the comment from Elizabeth, as we're kind of thinking about where we are today and where we need to go, obviously, the first thing we need to do is think about and identify where are we in terms of the state kind of addressing the clean energy needs of disadvantaged communities. So looking at kind of where we are today, the multiple different programs and initiatives that are being administered across the state, we want to kind of obviously build on that, but the first thing we need to do is kind of baseline, where are we, right? So as we're thinking about getting to and surpassing the 40% benefits goal, it's going to be important that we, across the agencies and authorities, have that kind of initial sense of like, where are we today and where's the calibration that's going to be needed? And that's going to look differently depending on like the program type, the technology that's being focused on, or even the administrator. And so, what we're going to be asking to do, and we'll talk a little bit more about this when we talk about implementation of, kind of this requirement is, we want, shifting and adaptation of investment strategies. So, there are a number of things that we can do here. Obviously, co-designing and, collaborating on like what programs and financial support looks like for communities is one thing, what those outcomes are. But then, then there's, the potential for agencies and authorities to be basically putting requirements into solicitations and, procurements to kind of identify specific outcomes for disadvantaged communities, obviously improving outreach and engagement, and even targeting projects. And then we're also, really kind of seeing the need in some cases to develop initiatives that are explicitly targeting disadvantaged communities, right? So if you think about the state's clean energy portfolio as like as a patchwork of sorts, you're going to have kind of like standard programs that are available, across the state. And using NYSERDA as an example, this is probably a simplistic example, but like NYSERDA has an energy efficiency program called Empower New York. That's something that, is accessible to eligible households across the state. And so we're obviously kind of seeing, just looking at the data, that there might be some pockets of the state where we're just not getting the uptake that we need. So in order to kind of help kind of reduce the participation barriers and increase uptake in, disadvantaged communities, we're kind of looking at incorporating like geographic eligibility into that program. So there's a pilot and like a soft launch that we've done with geographic eligibility to basically say, if you're located in these communities, you're automatically eligible for the program, right? So there are things like that that agencies and authorities can be doing to kind of make it easier for investments to happen within disadvantaged communities. And it's certainly, going to require kind of like, collaboration and identification of what those needs are to help us get there. So next slide, please, if there are any comments there. So, as we're thinking about how we actually go about implementing this investment and benefits requirement, this is obviously going to be an iterative process. We first spoke about this in like January of this year. And so there's been a lot of work that we'll talk about that's been more on just like process and understanding like where and how state agencies are making these types of investments that the state team has been really focused on since then. But, we're kind of expecting that our approach here is going to have to evolve over time, especially as Alana and Adriana had kind of suggested, as we're thinking about the application of this approach to investments, the Climate Bond Act or whatever else, winds up being necessary in the future. So the first thing is, we're kind of envisioning that we will have annual reporting by agency. And so the reporting would include a couple of things. So it would include the value and the percentage of place-based dollars going to disadvantaged communities. So this is going to be the metric that we would measure towards, the achievement of the 35% of benefits required, or, obviously the goal of 40%. So really the basis of that measurement, the numerator and denominator, would be, what are the investments that are happening within disadvantaged communities? A couple of reasons, or, the main reason for that is the level of funding is really the only metric that we're going to be able to confidently measure consistently across, program types, agency authority types, that sort of thing. And, co-benefits that are going to come, from those dollars invested are going to kind of flow, largely from the level of investment in those programs, right? So we really want to focus on dollars invested. Secondly, we would also have reporting on the percentage of co-benefits that are associated with those investments occurring within disadvantaged communities. So, and I failed to mention in the first bullet, we also will be reporting on the percent of investments and the co-benefits happening in the non-disadvantaged communities, right? So we want to be able to provide the picture of, here's what's happening within disadvantaged communities and outside of disadvantaged communities, so we can get, that measurement of, the percentage, occurring within disadvantaged communities. The one thing to flag with the co-benefits, we're currently, proposing to start with metrics that we know that we can actually calculate and, get to. So, in a way to kind of hit the ground running. So obviously looking at like a metric for jobs and employment, energy savings, energy bill savings, greenhouse gas emissions, estimated air quality improvements, right? So, we've heard from folks about a number of different areas of interest when it comes to, benefit metrics. And one of the biggest considerations that we have here is, we need to be able to have data on, to help us kind of, get to that benefit metric. So either we're directly capturing it, or we're kind of, getting to it through the investments. So, for instance, there could be factors that we can apply to the investments to kind of estimate the level of benefits that are happening there. Or, as we're thinking about, outcomes or benefits that might require more a long-term kind of view, studies or evaluations, right, that would have to happen to help us, better kind of quantify what those benefits are, right? So, so obviously this will be an ongoing kind of process for us to kind of identify benefit metrics that we can capture. And so, whether you guys have thoughts today or following this meeting, we definitely would appreciate, any thoughts that you have on benefit metrics that we should be thinking about trying to capture through this process. And then the last thing that we would look to report out on would be kind of a qualitative or any other quantitative outcomes or impacts associated with disadvantaged communities that agencies or authorities can make or can kind of can provide. So, thinking about the specific programs that might not have kind of the benefit metrics that we would be able to report out on across the board, we could be including those in this other kind of category of qualitative or quantitative metrics. And then, in addition to that, we're going to be expecting agencies to develop and maintain inventories of programs and investments that are intended to benefit disadvantaged communities. So we want to be able to have an eye on what's happening across the state with respect to these programs and investments. And then obviously also an expectation for agencies and authorities to be, adapting what they're doing based on, where they are in terms of the baselining of their initial investments, but then also based on what the needs are that we've heard from communities, right? So let me pause there. I think we have another slide, but any comments or questions so far on this content? Hey, Eddie, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Chris. This is just big picture reaction. This looks really on point. I think I want to thank you for you guys. Clearly, some of the feedback that the Climate Justice Working Group gave when we first started talking about this a year or more ago. Actually, I think it's more than a year ago. Clearly some of that feedback made its way in here, and so I'm grateful for you guys to be trying to kind of try to reflect some of the things we were hoping to get out of the analysis as we move forward. So it sounds like you're grasping a lot of it. Three quick points. One is, I don't call
Eddie, we might have lost you.
thoughtful
Can you,
structure and
yeah.
technology move. Can you?
There's some interference, Eddie.
Yeah, maybe, it sounds like a bad connection. Maybe what we'll do, maybe give Eddie a minute and maybe go to the next slide. Because there's actually a couple of points here that maybe would be important here. Based on Eddie's thoughts. But, the other kind of items just to kind of flag for you all. So the DEC and NYSERDA teams are working to develop a methodology and process for agencies and authorities to be doing this reporting right now. So a number of tools and process documents that would help facilitate the compilation of data. There's going to be a lot of process here, everything from, identifying the programs and investments, getting at those co-benefit metrics, and then also ensuring that, the data is QA, QC'd. So the DEC and NYSERDA teams have spent a lot of time and are looking at wrapping up that process now. And then, what we're kind of expecting is sometime, in the next several months, state entities, agencies, and authorities will receive guidance for how to comply with this process. And as we're kind of thinking about, the first report that we're able to publish, it's going to, our thinking is we would kind of tie that to the finalization of the DAC criteria. So we finalize the criteria, and then, several months later, allowing agencies to incorporate the DAC criteria into the process and systems. We would then kind of have a kind of initial reporting period that would include investments going back to 2020. So annually by agency or authority, 2020, 2021, and 2022. And then we would then seek to be reporting out on a regular cadence following that. So perhaps, the middle of the year kind of following that, but that timing is still a little TBD based on just the process. But hey, Eddie, can we try your line again?
Hey, sorry about that. Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
We can, yep.
Hey, sorry about that. What I was gonna suggest was three quick things, not quick, but just three short things, Chris. One is, I thank you again for sharing like this methodology and approach. I think it really reflects some of what we had been saying for a while about how to approach this. The three items I wanted to just suggest is, while the approach and methodology seems pretty clear here, it still feels abstract, meaning it would be really great to get a sense of like how much are we generally talking. Like I remember when we first started talking about this, I thought I remembered the clean energy investment portion of the budget when you added up this program and that program. I thought was between 2 and 3 billion. It could very well be that I'm totally conflating numbers and analyses, but whatever that amount is would be helpful to know what the total is and what the to the degree possible. Just trying to get a sense of, and it may be impossible because I know some of the geocoding was behind schedule, but it'd be great to know what the current ballpark figure is, the total amount of clean energy spending that we're talking about, and if at all possible to indicate how those expenditures are currently flowing. But again, if it's not possible, the other recommendation I was going to suggest is, in the grand scheme of things, some of the accountability here, there'll be a role for the controller's office to play in terms of, assessing, how, among all the other things that they do, assessing how the compliance is shaping up for CLCPA. If you all have not had that conversation with the controller's office, it might be getting to be time so that you guys are like, it would be unfortunate if you guys have a set of metrics that you're like, okay, this is how we're going to capture this compliance, and the controller comes up with a separate methodology, then you guys are arguing over that stuff. So I would just make a pitch for you guys. It sounds like you're getting to the point now where it might be useful for you guys to let the controller's office know, look, this is how we intend to keep ourselves accountable with the compliance, and make sure that that there isn't something that you guys are overlooking or some expectation they have that you guys may be overlooking. That's all. So, but thank you so much for these.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. And yeah, so the state, teams are kind of, working on this now, talking about, the actual, implementation and compliance of this. So, point taken. And we'll follow up. I mean, when we did start talking about this work, you were right. And it was based, and I think we presented this at, or here meeting back in January, but, based on kind of very initial, like, preliminary kind of surveys of state agencies, the total of, what they would kind of consider to be clean energy investments was somewhere between that $2 and $3 billion level, which, varied, quite a bit, by agency or authority. So, but we do not have a kind of updated, kind of like refined estimate. But, as we kind of move forward with this process, that's something that obviously once we have the final criteria, we'll be working with agencies and authorities and others to kind of help, do that geocoding and do that baselining. So we'll have more that we can obviously share on that over the next several months.
One quick follow-up, Chris. So it sounds like at some point, once the agencies do their kind of internal accounting, or at least comparisons, do you expect there'll be a moment when you guys can come to the Climate Justice Working Group? And again, it may be impossible at the moment to track where the money's going, but is there a way when you guys are ready to kind of sit down with us and walk us through what are all these different programs and what are, like, the 2 to 3 billion, whatever the number ends up being? It'd be helpful to know, what the programs are that consist of that, what the 2 to 3 billion consists of programmatically. And you probably aren't there yet, but it'd be great for you to share that with us when you can.
Yeah, we can definitely talk about the types of programs. And I think, just to, be clear, the estimate, that preliminary estimate was, a point in time. And so, I think, we all know depending on the budget or the funding source, like, they vary from year to year. So, I don't know where we are today there, but yeah, we definitely will come back and have that conversation with you all.
Chris, this is
Any other
Rob. Can I
comments?
jump in there?
Oh, hey, Rob. Yep.
So we have, tell me your name.
Jeffrey Naw.
Jeffrey has a question.
Yeah. So in the previous slide, you stated that agencies would be managing programs in order to help disadvantaged communities. Does that include do those programs include stuff for environmental permits? because currently as it exists, I work in the division of air resource, by the way. Like when we get an air permit that comes in, we look at EJ areas. We have a hearing just to see if they want to object to the facility being built, and then we only have that one hearing, and then the facility gets built, and then the people are kind of just out of the picture after that. Do we have any programs associated with that for the disadvantaged communities?
I don't know. We'll have to, we can follow back up on that question.
Yeah, unfortunately, just as a process issue, we really are not supposed to be taking direct questions from the public during the Climate Justice Working Group meetings. Yeah, it really can only be climate justice. That's okay. I should have stated it beforehand. It can really only be Climate Justice Working Group members, not because we don't want to hear from the public, simply because we do not have the mechanism for allowing every single person who is attending the meeting to ask questions. So
Gotcha.
because we don't have that mechanism, we can't allow for other people who just happen to be here to ask questions. We hope to maybe try to change that maybe in the future for future meetings after we finish the vote. But just in the future, it can really only be Climate Justice Working Group members who are commenting and asking questions.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for sharing that process point with us. I did have a question. This is Rawa. How are you? My question is, thank you so much for having put so much great work into this. It's becoming more and more clear about how this is going to operate. Once you come up with the sort of, what did you call it, like the how agencies were going to be collecting the information, what that process is going to look like, is that something that you're going to be sharing with Climate Justice Group members before it's implemented, or is there an opportunity for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Raul, we would want, we would want any input that you guys have on kind of the process. I mean, I think there's going to be really a question of, at a minimum, agencies are going to be limited by, their data systems, their data collection, right? So like I think we just want to like set an expectation that we're likely to have to just continue to evolve how we go about doing this, because we're trying to like implement something now where there may be there may not be the same set of functionality, I guess, in terms of systems across the state entities, right? So we need to think about like what is it that we can do to collect the data from each of those entities in a consistent way now, and then obviously we're gonna be able to identify where there'll be opportunities for improvements. So.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. And just one last question, and then I'm finished, is on an annual basis, as the reporting is coming out, have you guys thought through how we're going to either pivot or, make changes or what have you based on the information that's coming out year to year? Like, I just don't want it to be a situation where you're just like reporting like this is what happened. Is there going to be an opportunity to say, okay, well, this agency is doing a really great job with collecting information, maybe, but this other agency is not. Is there a way to inform, different strategies to try to create, as we build up from year to year to year, that there's some kind of uniformity or at least ability to be able to track the information from agency to agency?
Yeah, for sure, we'll be able to track information from agency to agency. And I think, and our intent is there will be kind of, in the spirit of continuous improvement, like we're going to need to, support agencies and authorities in terms of their kind of strategic development. That being said, not to go down a rabbit hole, but, I think, we all know there may be different funding sources or different, there are different rules and like planning timelines tied to certain programs that are being administered. So, I think this is going to be a new kind of a new process that agencies and authorities are going to be kind of incorporating. So what that alignment looks like, might look a little bit different by agency or authority. But I think the main point that, we're kind of interested in is, obviously getting the initial kind of baselining and data kind of collected and reported, right? So we can start to understand where those opportunities are for alignment. So, but we're, I think our intent here is, right, to be kind of, collaborative and consultative with the Climate Justice Working Group as we implement.
Chris, this is Abby. I just want to first reiterate, what's already been said about appreciating that all the work in progress that has clearly, happened over these past many months and the incorporation of the feedback that we previously provided. Just one quick question about transparency to the public. What plans might already be in place for platforms where this information, I think specifically, you mentioned that agencies would be developing and maintaining an inventory of programs and investments. Is that something that will be somewhere where people can see it?
So we're still working through kind of that piece of it, Abby. If we go to the next slide, we can give you here's our rough estimate of some of the visualizations that we'll be able to kind of pull together for reporting. So kind of, we're thinking of, obviously tabular kind of representations of the data, but then also, a geospatial kind of aspect as well, where we can actually look at the map and kind of see where investments are. And I think I don't know how we would kind of incorporate kind of like the other kind of aspects of what the agencies would be doing, but we'll take that back as something that is of interest, and we need to think about how to address. Do we have any other comments or questions from the working group? And I will say we do have a number of state team members who are, on the call, who have really been kind of, doing heavy lifting on putting, this process in place. So, one also just acknowledge it's a very large team effort, here. So. Yep, so I think this is the last slide. So yeah, I'll turn it back over to you, Alana, if there are no other questions or discussion from the working group.
Sure. Next slide, please. So thanks, Chris, for all of that. And of course, if anybody has any questions, or we can definitely reach out to Chris for additional information. Staff members were available to you guys if you want to go over this again in another setting, in a more one-on-one setting. Feel free to reach out to us and we can set something up. So we're going to move forward and just have a quick update on the DAC criteria. So to do that, we are I'm going to introduce Shannon Call. I don't know how many folks remember Shannon. We definitely introduced her in the past, but for those who haven't met her, she is a senior managing consultant with Illume, our illustrious consultants. She has spent over 15 years providing energy-related program design and analysis, and has driven numerous process and impact evaluations and market research projects for utilities and energy efficiency organizations at her time in Illume. She worked very closely with Alex and Amanda and the Illume team through the development of the disadvantaged communities criteria, and she has been doing a lot of work on the back end helping to drive this process forward. So she's actually going to take more of a front-facing role today, since Alex is in Argentina right now. So with no further ado, Shannon, I will leave it to you.
Thanks, Alana, and hi, everyone. Yes, as Alana said, with Alex out on vacation, I am here to give a pretty quick update, and you may see more of me as we continue moving forward. I did have some content on 2 slides before I'll start sharing my screen. So if we could have the slides back up. Yeah. So like I said, it's just a really quick update right now, since we just met last week. We do expect to have a lot more to share in the new year. So just to kind of quickly recap from last week's meeting. This list here is the indicators that we are planning to review for potential inclusion in the criteria. So right now we're in the process of seeking input from agency staff, and our team is also working on investigating different data sources and ways to operationalize these indicators here. And then on the next slide, these are the indicators that we're considering more long-term tracking indicators. So these, would just be for kind of that long-term tracking, monitoring, and ground truthing as we continue to review and assess the criteria throughout time. And then now I will try to share my screen just to give a real quick update more specifically on the different indicators. Let's see. Okay, so this Excel file should look familiar. This is the list that Alex showed on her screen during last week's meeting. We've added a little. Oh,
Can you
pardon?
zoom in, please?
Oh.
Sorry.
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you.
Is that better?
It is better. Yes, thank you.
Okay. So we've added just some information on the status here, and also a preliminary, I want to caution, this is pretty preliminary assessment of the likelihood that we'll have usable data in time to use before the February, or the currently planned February vote. So, as you can see, there's several indicators that we think there's a fairly moderate possibility that we'll have data to look at more closely before that vote, and then some where we probably won't. And we have a number of indicators where we are working with the DOH or DEC, or are planning to work with HCR on obtaining data sources. So there's a lot of work in progress right now. We just don't really have any real exciting updates or new data to show at this moment. And I can just kind of scroll through this list too. So the indicators on top here in the white are the ones that we're reviewing for potential inclusion. And then the ones in the gray towards the bottom here are the long-term tracking and monitoring indicators. Are there any questions about where we're at with the indicators or other work as we're moving forward? If anyone's raising their hand, I cannot see that right now. So just jump in.
Hey, Shannon, it's Eddie. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes.
Quick question about the abandoned buildings one.
Yeah.
I thought that there was just basic challenge. I mean, I think it's a good metric to track, but I thought that you guys had said that there was inconsistent data for that across the state. Is that still the case, or have you all, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are in terms of finding a way to adequately capture that metric statewide?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there is, we had heard some things last time that the city of Rochester has good data. As noted here, census data is not available at the census tract level, but we do want to check with HCR for available data, and I may ask my colleague Emily to jump in if she has any more specific updates on that one.
That's right.
Shannon, possibly make that a little bit bigger? Can it get a little bit bigger? Thank you.
we had worked with HCR, which is the Office of Housing and Community Renewal, for the industrial land variables last year or the year before when we were putting together that data. And so I wanted to go back and ask them again. We'll keep you updated on what they say because, yeah, the census data was limited.
So we're not ready to rule it out just yet. Yeah, we think there is a possibility of finding something there. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, everyone. If there are no further questions, I can turn it back over to Alana.
Emma, can you take the ball back? Okay, next slide. Okay, so work plan and timeline. So just so folks know, periodically in this process, I really want to request that we take a look at our proposed timeline and determine as a group whether or not we feel we're still on track to meet our goal, finalizing criteria by February 2023. This is kind of similar to what Alex did before we voted on the criteria. She just did a temperature check every now and then just to make sure we were comfortable with the direction that we're heading. And I want to do something similar with this. I don't want anyone to feel rushed, but I also don't want anyone to feel as if we're dragging our feet in this process. So I just want to make sure that periodically we're all comfortable with what the timeline looks like, that we think that we're going to be able to get to a vote. Next slide. So just as a reminder, this is where we are. Obviously, we're past November. We are in our last meeting of December where we're still considering, we have to change some of this, but obviously come January 2023, after we've had a good amount of time to kind of sit with some of our suggested, indicator changes and the current indicators that we're using, to actually start having some discussions about anything that we could potentially change based on information and data that we have. That will probably look at having about at least 2 and possibly 3 meetings in 2023, and those meetings would be 2 hours because we do definitely want to try to get to that February date. We don't have a date yet. I will I've already sent around a survey about meetings, but I will send another survey just kind of getting an idea of when we want to vote, similar to what I did when we voted on the draft criteria. Does anybody have any questions or concerns right now that they'd like to discuss before we move on?
This is Jill. Just a comment. I know that you sent around a survey. Maybe you just said this, and it's been a month. You sent around a survey a while ago to put blackout dates for the new year. Maybe it was from December to the new year, but it might be helpful to do that again because I know people's schedules evolve quickly.
Absolutely. And again, folks, you can always just email those to me if you have any dates that you know are definitely not going to work between January and I said March, but January and February, and the end of February. Just give me dates that are definitely not going to work and we can work around them, especially when it comes to our voting date. We want everyone to be present for that vote. So we'll definitely be looking to solidify some actual dates in the new year. And I will be sending out a survey that actually has dates, but definitely for that voting date, we're going to want everybody present and ready to vote. Okay, if there are no other questions or comments, before we go into work goals, I'm going to, Samir, are you on?
Alana?
Hey, Alana. Yes,
Yeah.
I'm on. Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry, Eddie, that's Eddie?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Samir. Yeah, and I just want to make sure you're seeing in the chat. I hear that I'm still sounding weird or weirder than I sound normally. So I don't know if you've seen the chat, but how many meetings in January are we expecting?
We're at the very least 2. If we feel that we need an additional meeting, I can schedule one. So at the very least 2 2-hour meetings.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks. Sorry, Samir.
No problem.
Thanks.
I also see Rawa. Do you have a hand or is that a legacy hand?
It's a current hand, not legacy. Hi, Alana, how are you?
Hi, good.
Thanks, Samir. So is it possible for me to send some dates that I'm not available in January and February? And can I ask the other climate justice working group members to do that? And if we can lock in the dates sooner than later?
Yes, if you could all send those to me as soon as possible. I just want to have those, because it's, obviously it's difficult, especially with the open meetings law and the requirements for, physically being present in order to, have a quorum. We definitely want to make sure that we have folks and that are in place, and we have meeting locations that are reserved. We keep bumping into people who are already starting to reserve areas that we actually need for our meetings. So we want to kind of get in there as soon as possible. So if everybody can have those sent to me, I will send out a reminder tomorrow to everybody with a deadline. But if everyone can try to think of any dates or check your calendars for any dates that might be blackout dates and get those to me, that would be great.
Thank you.
So if I can follow up on that, this is Elizabeth. 2 meetings ago, we talked about accommodating disability and having your lawyers look into whether or not taking the call virtually was a violation of the open meetings law when one is disabled, and no one has gotten back to me about that.
We are still looking to get an opinion on that. Our attorney Tyler Hepner is on. Tyler, did you want to say anything quickly?
Yeah, sure. I can speak to it really quickly. There is not a clear answer, unfortunately. After doing some research, the federal circuit courts are split, actually, on the decision. And since it's not our law, it's DOS's law, I think their attorneys really need to speak to it. So that's where it's at right now.
So you're creating a calendar, and I don't know whether I'm going to be able to attend because of my physical mobility, and opening yourself up to litigation on discrimination on the basis of disability. I would urge you to move a little quicker on that, because to be honest, it really is making an exception for one member of the advisory group to participate digitally. Now, I will try to make it to these meetings in person, but it is a challenge for me sometimes. So I would just urge you to do right by this, and not so that I don't have to raise it again, or I don't come to a meeting where I'm told that my vote has no weight because it's a violation to the open meetings law.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I will point out that the resolution that we passed does allow for virtual participation and for virtual voting, just so long as we have a physical quorum. That basically means that if we don't have a physical quorum, that nobody can basically vote. But as long as we have that physical quorum, it is acceptable for folks to participate via video chat conference. So
I understand that. And let me just respond as an attorney. What if I'm the person who provides the quorum and I'm not physically there? What if the number that you need is the one that is signing in virtually? So I think, I appreciate you sharing that, and I get it, but I'd like to know what happens if I'm that person, if we're short one person and I'm the one who constitutes the quorum.
Nope, absolutely, we understand. We're definitely seeking an opinion from Department of State on this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Good afternoon, working group members. I'm really excited to share that I'll be hosting virtual office hours to discuss anything that you would like to bring up regarding the scoping plan. I sent an email to all of you earlier this afternoon with my hours, and the hours are open to you and any member of your organization that you'd like to send on your behalf or include with you. And I'll be online during all of those times that I provided in the email. So, just feel free to email me or text me to let me know that you want to join. And then I'll create an MS Teams event. And for now, the office hours are through December 30, but if there's express interest, I can look into extending them certainly into January. So just wanted to flag that. Thank you so much, and happy holidays if we don't get to chat before then. I'll turn it back to Lana.
Thanks, Samir. Next slide, please. So next steps, as I said before, I sent a survey out regarding the best dates and times for our meeting. I can send that out again for folks. I was going to have it due by Friday, but we can extend that date for everybody just to give people more time to look at it. I'll also send out a chart for people if you want to start filling out or sending me days that you definitely can't be available. That would be very helpful. And as for Elizabeth, we definitely are seeking an opinion from the Department of State, and we hope to have a response from them very soon. Just with regards to, again, 2023, we are going to be moving to 2-hour meetings. So when you're making your selections for days and times in the afternoon, just consider that moving forward. We're going to probably move pretty fast in 2023. Rather similar to how we moved when we were voting on the draft criteria. So we definitely want to make sure that we have as many people here as possible. If not you, then somebody who's with from your organization as a proxy who can take the information in your stead. As always, just continue to review the documents and materials between meetings, and feel free to reach out to us if you need any additional documentation, any additional support, if you just want to discuss certain elements that we spoke about on a one-on-one basis. Illum is going to be available to provide one-on-one support as the rest of the technical team to help folks work through concepts and ideas. So absolutely take advantage of those one-on-one times. Next slide, please. So are there any additional questions before we close things out for 2022? Sorry, Climate Action Council will be voting on the scoping plan on the 19th. So if anybody wants to watch that process go down, the 19th, Climate Action Council will be voting. But are there any questions before we close things out? Okay. As always, thank you everyone for your time and your hard work. Like I said, we understand everybody is extremely busy, especially this time of year, and that we do ask you to do a lot with no reimbursement for your time and energy. Your efforts are greatly appreciated. Your questions and your commentary is always appreciated. And even though sometimes maybe we sound like we're stressed out and irritated, we're not. We actually do appreciate all the work that you do, and even when you challenge us. So please, everybody, have a safe and happy holiday season. We'll see you in the new year. I will get those dates and times out to everybody as soon as possible. And just thank you. See you.
Thank
you. Thank you. Happy holidays.
Bye.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everyone.
I can't get out of this webinar. What the fuck? I can't get out of it. And I can't get out. What the fuck?
I feel you, Eddie, but you're not on mute.